The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Over the last couple of weeks, we did a couple of stories relating to the genetic modification of human embryos. There was the announcement from 2 weeks ago about the first time that there had been genetic modification done of human embryos in China. We won't rehash the entire story, but you can check it out. Needless to say, it's still a technology that's a long time from widespread application. We also heard yesterday or the day before on the bonus show that the National Institute of Health in the US will not allow this type of experimentation and will not provide any funding for it, rather. So right now, let's talk about the morals and the ethics of this. That's what I want to discuss today. Right now, it would be immoral to start modifying viable embryos that could result in live births, because the technology is just not there, right? There is no reliability that you would be able to make a modification that would not horribly damage the embryo in a way that would lead to a horrible life if there would even be a birth. But once the technology improves, the chances of huge errors that lead to, catastrophic medical repercussions will decrease significantly. And then I'm actually wondering if it would be unethical not to genetically modify embryos when they could maybe remove genetic defects that make people predisposed to certain diseases or early death or a lower quality of life. How could we argue that it will be unethical to modify human embryos when around 40% of people get cancer at some point, and maybe modifying embryos could reduce that? And people will argue, that it's immoral because of religious reasons, or you're playing God, or what? If we think about it that way, might it not be immoral not to do these modifications once the process is perfected?
Once again, I will bring up the movie Gattaca, which was way ahead of its time. It kind of addresses this, and it's brilliant. But I think as this becomes more normal, perhaps it will be. If you know that your child has this certain percentage of this horrible disease or illness, then yeah, wouldn't you be a terrible person if you couldn't quickly and cheaply make sure that your child does not have this horrible, debilitating disease? Yeah,
now the cheaply thing we'll talk about, because you brought that up before, and we'll get to that. But if you imagine, for example, that there was a certain point at which, I don't know, antibiotics were really expensive, let's say, for example, and they were still being tested, and it wasn't really clear what the side effects would be. But eventually, once we figured out that antibiotics are mostly safe, and they can save people, they can prevent people from dying from conditions that did kill people 100 years ago, doesn't it become immoral? Wouldn't it be immoral today not to give a child antibiotics because you don't believe in that type of thing? You think it's immoral. There are some religions that think that, and we think that by and large, the secular world thinks that they're a little bit crazy. If genetic modification of human embryos does become effective at fixing the predispositions towards certain diseases, and it's affordable, as Lewis said, it may be seen as equally odd not to do that. But let's talk pragmatically about what Lewis brought up, right? Only the rich will have access to this, Lewis said when we discussed this a couple of weeks ago. It won't level the playing field much if the only people who can afford genetic modification of human embryos are those who have the blind luck of being born into the 1% or the 0.1%. There's a good chance that this type of genetic modification could increase the gap between those who can and cannot afford it. But if you look at a government subsidy for those who cannot afford it, and you couple that with efficiency of scale, I can see this being affordable for people who want it because it's fiscally conservative, or it could be. You could make a case, Lewis, that there's a high value to avoiding certain diseases. Once it's available, the rich are going to pay for this anyway, right? And if we can subsidize the potential successful genetic human embryo modification for people who can't afford it, there's probably a long-term health benefit, financial benefit of improved health for all that would reflect itself in reduced emergency room visits and long-term care for certain conditions. So while I agree that there's probably going to be a period where this type of thing, whatever it ends up being, will only be available to the rich, there's a pretty good case to be made as to why it should be subsidized by the government if and when it becomes reliable, safe, and predictable.
Agreed. I mean, for the foreseeable future, it will be available primarily only for the rich. But we are in a phase where this is being, this is still experimental.
Of course.
We are still figuring out how to do this. And so there will be people who are lucky enough to be able to participate in trials and experiments to see if this works, and hopefully with some success.
Another question is, how will all societies care for the elderly after annual improvements in techniques and methodologies for genetic modification? Will we see a change as a society in terms of the attitude towards the elderly? And it's not really even a fair question to ask it that way, because different societies already see the elderly in drastically different ways. So we would have to see how it would affect different societies. But I think that that's also a question that would need to be discussed as any type of life extension technology and disease prevention technology becomes more prevalent.
Yeah, it is an interesting time. Things are changing, David. And are you ready? We're about to go into the future.
Who knows? And if you're hearing this and you are truly and honestly convinced that none of this stuff will ever happen, please email me and explain to me why you have that point of view. I would be very interested.
It has already happened. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a snowball effect now. You can't stop this. It's going to happen.
Tweet us, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is mostly funded by our audience, and we're at the very end of this half-price membership situation. So after we announced the big move from New York to Boston and the expansion of the show and the addition of investigative journalism, all this stuff, 4 different members got in touch with me and said, hey, David, I want to offer some half-price memberships. I want to do, one person said 6, another person said 8, one person said 10. In any case, we had a total of about around 30 of these. We are now down to just the last 3. So if you want to get one of these half-price subsidized memberships, someone else has already paid for half of the yearly membership. So it's $60. Someone else has already paid for $30. You pay the other $30, and you can lock that price in for as long as you want. Email us through our website, davidpakman.com. Click on Contact Us. Say, I want one of those last half-price memberships. And in order of, as those emails are received, we will get you the access code to sign up. Today's new member of the day is Anthony Dixon. Anthony, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Couldn't do it without you. We really do depend mostly on membership for this program to stay on the air. 3 years ago this week, Mitt Romney's prep school classmates recalled incidents where Mitt Romney bullied John Lauber, a student that Mitt Romney apparently thought was gay. It included Mitt Romney reportedly cutting the kid's hair off. And according to multiple testimonies, Romney was very upset that Lauber had long hair. He tackled him, viciously cut his hair off with scissors. The story was really important to us, but it didn't make that big of a splash at the time. I would have thought this is very concerning behavior that Mitt Romney is alleged to have engaged in, and it didn't make much of a splash at the time.
Yes, I thought because maybe Romney was so young at the time, people kind of brushed it off, but it was definitely very telling of Mitt Romney that someone would do that.
Yeah, and it's not like we hear stories like that all the time about presidential candidates, right? I mean, it's not that, oh yeah, but all 100 members of the Senate, we have 5 stories like that about them as well, and half of all governors or something like that. It was a very specific and it was an outlier for me. I still remember that.
It was big, yeah, and you're right. We just don't hear stories like that. I mean, for us, I think for me, let's just say I was entertaining the thought of voting for Mitt Romney. I mean, that right there could have been the nail in the coffin.
You're saying if you had been entertaining that?
Yes, yes. So I never would have entertained that notion
No,
ever.
I figured we wanted to make that very, very clear.
I thought I said that.
I wonder. No, I thought you said that you like. Yeah, I think I just misunderstood. But just to be clear, what Lewis said was, had he been entertaining that thought, he might have been pushed off of that path by finding out that Mitt Romney reportedly bullied a gay kid and cut his hair simply because he appeared gay to Mitt Romney. I wonder who from the current suite of candidates might have such a story in their past that might be uncovered. I don't know why. I just think it's Rand Paul.
Well, if it were Rand Paul, wouldn't we have heard about it before? I mean, he's been in the spotlight for so long. I think that if he had a skeleton in his closet like that perhaps we would know about it already.
Mitt Romney was in the spotlight a lot longer than Rand Paul has been.
Well, in a different way. No, I mean
he was governor.
That's true, but I feel when you're operating at the national level, perhaps you're under more scrutiny. Maybe I'm wrong, but I guess when you are a presidential candidate and you've won the primary, that's when really everything starts coming out of the closet.
Who do you think of those who are running for president right now would be most likely to have some kind of physical bullying in their past, if you had to guess?
Well, I think probably that would be between Cruz and Rubio.
Really?
I think so.
Here's why I hesitate to say that. They both were born in other countries. And, I'm sorry. Marco Rubio was not, but Marco Rubio was born here. But what I'm saying is they both have sort of like an immigrant background. And sometimes those kids are the bullied rather than the bullies, although we don't really know.
That is true. Hard to say. I suppose Ben Carson, I guess I could picture him as a bully too, but I don't really know too much about him.
Based on what they say now, I could see all of them as bullies, to be perfectly honest. 2 years ago this week, Bulletproof whiteboards were being purchased at a price of $300 each by a Minnesota school district. And we talked about the use of violence or the fear of violence to sell products and who's best positioned to take advantage of violence. Obviously, gun manufacturers are very well positioned to take advantage of violence. The NRA basically just fearmongers anytime there's violence. And when there isn't violence, they talk about how it's because more people are buying guns. So whether there's violence or not, the NRA uses the fear of violence or the possibility of violence to sell more guns. These bulletproof whiteboards were completely useless products, but fear really got the best of the school district in the wake of Sandy Hook, and they went for it. They were produced by a company called Hardwire, and you could buy an 18 by 20 inch board yourself for $3.99. I guess the school got a discount down to $300, and you can also get a bulletproof clipboard, which I guess what you would put over your heart.
I'm not really sure. In a hail of bullets, a bulletproof clipboard I think would be the last thing I want to protect myself.
Well, you could say I'm going to protect my head or I'm going to protect my heart, right? Those would be the kind of options if you had just the bulletproof clipboard and a frenzy of fire started.
Yeah, you've also just only got your hands holding on to said clipboard while bullets are impacting it. And, I think it could probably pretty easily go flying out of your hands, just like children holding these big whiteboards.
The district spent a total of about $25,000 on these bulletproof whiteboards. Is this different than selling gold coins to people after telling them the economy will collapse? I mean, it's fear-based marketing.
Fear-based marketing, and it's probably the most effective form of marketing, except for, cigarettes way back in the day and making people think that you're really cool and classy if you smoke. That was pretty effective too.
Well, not to mention if the product is physically addictive, that's a pretty good self-replicating marketing campaign.
That is true, yes. But I think this is really fear is a great tool.
1 year ago this week, Naomi Mutah, the leader of the Nigerian protest movement aimed at finding the girls that had been kidnapped by Boko Haram, was detained. And the kidnappers, Boko Haram, threatened to sell the girls. Nigeria came under fire after these girls were kidnapped because the government really didn't seem to care that much about rescuing them. And we talked at the time, Lewis, about why this might be. And we said, well, maybe the government is either just completely outwardly in bed with Boko Haram, or they're just afraid of what would happen if they seriously try to crack down on Boko Haram and find these girls. But since then, Nigeria did step up efforts to destroy Boko Haram and rescue captives, but they've also been helped significantly by troops from Chad.
That is true. Chad has helped. And over the past few weeks, and there have been many developments in this over the past few days, they have rescued over 1,000 women that were left behind by Boko Haram as Boko Haram was losing territory. And they have been telling their stories, and it is really ugly. It is crazy what they have witnessed and had to endure.
Was there a particular anecdote that was particularly shocking to you?
Well, there were, of course, many of these women were rescued, and they were told by the Nigerians to stay in the tracks of the vehicles as we leave and bring you to safety, because Boko Haram has put landmines everywhere around their territory. And some of the women, I guess, either didn't get the message or started to stray and blew themselves up. Oh. And also, as the tanks and trucks were coming in, I guess in the chaos, they were just running over and hitting some of these captives.
You mean the rescuers were by accident in the chaos actually running over some of the captives that they were presumably there to save?
I did read that. Yes. Wow. So it has been really ugly over there.
Well, I guess if we're to try to find a silver lining, it's that Nigeria seems to be less impotent when it comes to dealing with Boko Haram. Can we say that? Is that the silver lining here?
I think Boko Haram is safe to say that they are losing the battle right now. And I hope this continues, and I hope they continue to receive help from surrounding countries.
Interestingly, so far, not much practical benefit to the alliance that we saw Boko Haram swear to ISIS. It doesn't seem like thus far it's really bearing too many fruits for them.
No, I think it's a little too difficult to get help from the Middle East over to Nigeria, luckily.
After the break, our interview with Buddy Roemer. Glad you're with us on this Friday. Remember to email us about those few remaining half-price memberships.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For this week's classic interview, I thought we would talk about money in politics and money in media and go back to our December 1st, 2011 interview with Buddy Roemer, the former governor of Louisiana, who is actually really now a Republican. He was a Democrat at one point, and he really is interested in getting money out of politics. We talked about how we want to stay independent. We had our big announcement a week ago about moving the program to Boston and raising money and all of this stuff. Buddy Roemer actually has a group that has invested in the Young Turks, and he's really putting his money where his mouth is with regard to getting money out of politics and funding independent media. And it was such a great interview that we had with Buddy Roemer that I thought, what better time than now to go back to December 1st of 2011. We've been talking about money in politics for a long time, even with Republicans, as this interview is going to illustrate. Let's check it out. Buddy Roemer was the 52nd governor of Louisiana from 1988 to 1992. He's also running for the Republican presidential nomination. He was elected as a Democrat, but switched to the Republican Party in March of 1991. Governor, why'd you switch? I'm getting so many questions from my audience, and at the top of the list is, why did you switch parties?
Two reasons. One was that in the 1980s, I seemed to be much more aligned with the interest of the Republican parties, or at least the interest that they talked about. Abraham Lincoln kind of things in terms of civil liberties, smaller government, more individual liberty and responsibility. I like that. Teddy Roosevelt idea that competition should be fair. Republicans at the time were much different from the Democrats, who got funded by the big corporations. The Republicans didn't then. Education works best when it's run locally, with the school board kind of overlooking the agencies rather than the federal government doing. I like that. So while I was in Congress, I was a Democrat, but a conservative one, and there was no room in my party for me.
Well, why do you consider yourself, I mean, now your signature issue really seems to be funding of elections, funding
Yes.
of candidates. And really, I mean, when we look at American politics right now, your point of view seems very, very similar to Dennis Kucinich. That's the one person I find where you do really seem to agree. What issues do you still find yourself to really be in agreement with today's Republican Party on?
All right, let me hit that, but let me finish you asked me a really good question. Why did I change? Because no governor in American history, before or since, has changed parties while in office. So it was a big decision for me. Now remember, I'm fighting corruption. Louisiana had 12% unemployment, low-paid teachers, worse-rated bonds. Our kids were leaving the state. Corruption, corruption, corruption. So first I ran for office with a $100 limit, no PAC money, free to lead, and I won. I beat the establishment. And so I wanted to finish the job, and the way to do that was to establish a second party. I switched to a Republican, and we established a second party. I'm very proud of that. You need two parties. Now, back to your question today. Who I'm closest to? Really, none of them. Both parties are corrupt. David, you know that.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have a president who ran on hope and change. My God. The two things he hasn't delivered on is hope and change. You know why? He doesn't have time. He's out raising $1 billion to run for re-election. Where was his first fundraiser? Wall Street, $35,000 a ticket. You know who the sponsor was? Goldman Sachs. So I'm not proud of the Republican Party, but I'm damn sure not proud of the Democratic Party. They're in a race for corruption. I will stand in this campaign and will be elected if I can ever reach the national stage, because my position is where the American people is. I want a president free to lead. I want a president who will do the right thing. I want a president who will grow jobs, not grow the size of government.
Yeah, so how come you're not in the Republican debates, in the national Republican debates? I mean, I also spoke with Fred Karger, who also is not participating in those debates. He wants to be participating. Is it because it's based on poll numbers, national poll numbers? Why aren't you in there?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer. I've been running for 10 months. And Fred has his own issues. That's not my issue. But my issue affects everything that can be done in Washington. It's why Obama has been a poor president. He's a good man, but he can't get anything done. You know why? The big checks on it. David, the president has no power. He's given it up for re-election. You know who has the power? Goldman Sachs.
No question about it. I mean, you know I agree with you on that.
I mean, this is the issue, though, David. Don't confuse it with anything else. And all a debate is a forum to get the issue out there. And the reason they keep me out of it is they don't want to talk about the issue because they're addicted to the money.
Would you run alongside Ron Paul? If asked, would you be Ron Paul's running mate? That's a question I'm getting from a lot of Ron Paul supporters.
Yeah, I like Ron Paul. I like him a lot. I'm different of him on many key issues. I think there is a role for government. He would eliminate it. I think health reform needs to happen. I think we need fair trade with foreign countries. It's unfair now, but I like Ron Paul's character. I like his issue of the central bank. We ought to do away with Humphrey Hawkins and keep it on one issue of currency. I told Ron that I would, if elected president, have an immediate audit of the Federal Reserve. He loved it. He started using it in his speeches. Ron and I served in Congress together 30 years ago. We're close. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but the two of us would make one hell of a change in America.
And would you run alongside a Democrat on a mixed ticket?
Absolutely. Look, we need change. We need to throw corruption out. I'm a broom. That's all I am. I'm not interested in being a lifelong politician. I've been out of politics for 20 years, and I've been happy as hell, David. You know that. I've grown a $1 billion bank, no bailout money. I've been very successful. I'm a happy man, but I'm afraid about what's happening in America. I think this is a country in decline, and I will go anywhere and meet with anybody and team with anybody, no matter what party they're in. Let me tell you what the test is. Do you put America first? Do you put America first?
What about Jesse Ventura? Would you run with Jesse Ventura?
Say it again?
Jesse Ventura. Would you run with Jesse Ventura, former Minnesota governor, third party guy?
I don't know enough about him. And notice I have not tried to name names.
Right.
You mentioned Ron Paul. I do know Ron, and I would welcome an alliance there. But let me go further.
Okay.
I think it needs to be vetted very carefully. I think putting a central ticket together outside of both parties, having an independent or a Democrat to join with me, I would be very interested in that.
Tell me, why do you think Herman Cain, who has zero experience in governing and politics, is seen as more of a legitimate candidate than you, a former governor?
He's not seen as more of a legitimate candidate. He's just better known. He was in all the debates, man. I mean, you get it? I mean, if you're not in the debate, you're unknown. How can you compare a known to an unknown?
No, let me rephrase. No,
David, let me have 5 debates talking about jobs and corruption, and then we'll see who the most popular candidate is. It won't be Herman Cain.
Okay, so let me rephrase then, because I've said from the start Herman Cain doesn't actually have a real chance at being the Republican nominee.
That's correct.
He may have at the very most he has 2 weeks left in this campaign before he'll be forced out. Right. But my question is, why have things aligned themselves in such a way where Herman Cain has become so much more well known and more popular in the polls than you have?
He's been in the debates, David. You keep asking a circular question. Look, this is the 21st century, David.
Yeah.
Quit running 4 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Debates were not that important then. They're everything now. Most Americans don't give a damn. They're worried about their job and their family. The election's a year away. This is an inside ball game. What you do on the debates is get known. They check your credibility. They see how you answer under pressure. They see how you answer when you get a surprise question. They see how you answer when another candidate attacks you. A debate is a wonderful thing. It's 2 hours every week. It's 20 hours. It's 24 hours. I have none of that. In the last poll in Florida, statewide, run by a professional firm, I stood 6th in the race with 4 guys below me, all of who'd been in the debate. I have not been in a single one. Let me get on the debate. And one of 2 things are going to happen, David. Either I'll shut up and do nothing, or we'll be the next president of the United States.
Well, there's more options than just those 2, I think.
You keep asking. I mean, I don't know why you do it. You need to think about it. You keep asking the same question. Well, buddy, why aren't you better known? Why aren't you higher in the polls? Well, let me give you the answer. I haven't been on a single debate.
But why not is the question. Why haven't you been in those debates?
First, the requirement was that you be a formal candidate for president. In the first 3 national debates, I was not. So I didn't worry about it. When I announced in August, I inquired as to what the requirements are. Since I was the only candidate who was a congressman and a governor. And they said, well, you had to have 1% polls. Well, I hadn't been in politics in 20 years, so I said, well, I've got some work to do. I made 1%. That was 3 more debates that I missed. So I called again, and I was told you had to have 2%. So I worked again, and I made 2%. That's where I am in the national polls. And then the last 3 debates, they had a different requirement. You had to raise $500,000 in the 90 days prior to the debate. Well, I don't take PAC money. I don't have a super PAC. I have a $100 limit. I've raised $256,000, average contribution $60, but that's only half of what they wanted me to raise. Why is that a requirement? And I asked them, I said, why is that a requirement? And here's what they told me. We got to find ways to keep some people out. Wow. That's how we pick a president?
That's definitely a sad commentary. The one way that I can guarantee you'd get right into the national spotlight is if you have an extramarital affair. That seems to really get people interested. You'll be in all the debates then, wouldn't you?
You're being so unfair to Herman.
Hey, last question.
Well, by the way, I'm a divorced man. So I guess when I get to the top, my marriage will be looked at. That's fine with me. But I've been lucky and pretty good for a boy.
Hey, if you are not if you happen to not be the Republican nominee, will you support whoever does come out of this Republican field, or might you look to a third party or to a Democrat?
I'll support the best person for president. We'll see who that is. I'm hoping that's a Republican. But it will be somebody who endorses campaign reform as the key to turning America around and growing jobs. It's just that simple. And I've not heard a single candidate, Democrat or Republican, mention campaign reform and be telling the truth.
Absolutely. Neither have I. We've been speaking with the 52nd governor of Louisiana and current Republican presidential candidate, Buddy Roemer. Really a pleasure to speak with you, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David. Good job, man.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Let's get into this week's audience questions. Every week we like to answer 3 questions from the audience at the end of the Friday show to kind of wrap the week up. First question today is from James. James wants to know, what is your opinion on modern day feminists? Now, even the question, Lewis, is kind of a loaded question because modern day, with regard to feminism, by some is already used as an ad hominem to say modern day feminism is radical feminism and it's something that should be opposed. So let's ignore the issue of modern day as a sort of interpretation for something else. My opinion on feminism today, right, is that we still have areas of American society where there is sexism and there is misogyny. If people want me to come out and say every aspect of society is riddled with heinous sexism and misogyny that needs to be addressed, I don't subscribe to that. I do subscribe, however, to the idea that in many, many areas, there are both subtle and overt examples and undercurrents of sexism and misogyny. We've talked about this with regard to ageism. We've talked about this with regard to certain fields of work. We've talked about this with regard to paycheck equality. And I know that the anti-feminists and the men's rights activists will swear up and down that there is no wage gap. And I reject that, right? So if the question, what is really the question, I think, is what I'm wondering, Lewis. If the question is,
I think the question is, what do you think of those people who call themselves feminists, who are fighting for equality, I guess you could say?
For those who call themselves feminists and are fighting for equality, I applaud them and I consider myself one of those people. What do I say to the... You
consider yourself a feminist?
Of course, but absolutely.
Okay.
And why wouldn't I, right? I believe in equality for women. I don't believe that we should be discriminating on the basis of gender, and period. Now, some would come to me and say, David, you're an equity feminist, but modern day feminism has become radicalized and militant, and you need to denounce that. And I reject that is mainstream feminism today. I simply do. I know that we've had interviews where we have guests who say that is what is sort of the kind of status quo of feminism at large today. I just reject that. And I also reject the idea of equity feminism, because equity feminism is actually something that is defined. And equity feminism, many so-called equity feminists, self-described equity feminists, say that the concern of equity feminists should only be discrimination on the basis of gender by government. And I think that we should also be talking about discrimination on the basis of gender by society, culturally, by companies. So I reject what is by some considered to be the sort of textbook definition, at least according to Stanford philosophy, of equity feminism. So that's where I stand, Lewis. I say, yeah, anybody who is going to become radicalized or militant, I'm going to be skeptical of two things. What are their actual intentions and whether their methods are the best to achieve their goals. But feminism, as I define it, and as it is historically defined, is of course something that I support as a progressive.
Yes. So there is not equality, and there should be. And you have people who call themselves feminists who are fighting for equality, but it's a wide range of people who call themselves feminists. And of course, like with anything, if you move to one extreme, you are no longer helping, and you are probably doing more harm than good.
The other problem also, though, Lewis, with this whole thing about the moderate feminists versus radicalized feminists and third wave feminists, you get into this no true Scotsman fallacy that exists with religion a lot, which is, okay, Christians are not violent people. Here's 10 examples of Christian violence done under the under the understanding that they are following the Bible. Oh, those aren't actually Christians. Those are people who say they're Christians, but they're not really. Isn't that ultimately what we're getting into with the feminist thing, which is, oh, well, feminism at large now is radical. And then you say, no, actually, those are perversions of feminism. And then someone else says, no, actually, that's just mainstream feminism today. I don't even know that that's a productive conversation at this point.
Well, maybe not. But of course, you still have to, those who are on the side of logic and reason and more moderate still have to defend themselves from those who are saying the crazy things, the militant, radical feminists who are saying incredibly ridiculous and inflammatory and maybe hateful and maybe illogical things, because you can't just really ignore them because everyone's listening to them too. So I guess you kind of have to fight that battle and have that discussion.
Yeah, and I think the balance is from within the movement addressing what is considered mainstream and what is not, right? And saying, hey, you know what? Just because, and interestingly enough, this is very similar to what's going on with religion in this country, which is, hey, by and large, most religious people believe A, but a very loud minority are given a lot of attention for believing the opposite of A. And then how are we to determine how much attention should that get? What's the responsibility of those who don't believe that to denounce it? And this comes up with Islam a lot, right? There's violence done under the name of Islam. And you start hearing a contingent say, where are all the Muslim leaders denouncing this? And there's a debate to be had over whether, why do they need to denounce this if they don't consider this really to be a part of what Islam is today? Why is it all of a sudden on them to denounce it or be lumped in as somehow supporting that point of view? It's a pretty dicey thing that you get into there.
It is. And when it comes to leadership, who are the leaders of the feminist movement? You clearly have religious leaders, and they're easily identifiable. They speak for many people. I don't think it's so clear when it comes to feminism.
Well, those who want to demonize anything under the umbrella of feminism will only point to extremist and more militant voices and say these are the leaders, even if that's not the consensus, right? And you're absolutely right that how do you identify who the so-called leaders are? A broader conversation probably than the one we're having now, but some thoughts there to answer Kira's question. That question was from James. The next question is from Kira. Kira wants to know, have you taken dance lessons and would you? Lewis, have you taken dance lessons?
I have never willingly taken dance lessons, although I remember back in grammar school during gym class or PE, physical education, whatever it's called now, or wellness in some cases, there was a block there where we had to do square dancing, and I hated it. And I think I sat that one out. I don't really recall. But
I remember a time, Lewis, where you actually danced, and the circumstances were crazy. I mean, you had all sorts of goals that that made you decide to use the dancing as a sort of tool, I think. And it was one crazy evening, I think we can say for sure.
It was. There was alcohol involved, and we'll leave it at that.
I actually have taken dance lessons. In the last year, I took a few, like I think 4 or 5 tango lessons. I'm Argentinian, so maybe I'm supposed to know how to dance tango, but I don't. And I had 4 or 5 tango lessons here in New York City. There was an Argentinian guy I met who has a tango studio, and my girlfriend and I went for 4 or 5 classes. It actually wasn't bad, but it wasn't really my thing, right? I mean, it was tolerable for an hour and a half a week for a month, but it just wasn't really my thing.
Yeah, I heard all about that, and it's good that you were willing to try it, though. I think I would not want to do that. I really don't like dancing. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I never want to do it. But let's just say I had to do something in that realm. I think I would want it to be something ultra specific like that, and I think it would be more palatable that way. But I'm not into it.
I could see Lewis taking tango lessons. That's definitely something I think that would be a great piece for the show. You know, if we do, as we expand programming with the move to Boston that we announced a week ago, maybe some kind of documentary piece around Lewis. It's not necessarily hard-hitting investigative journalism, but I think it would still be pretty titillating to the audience.
Yeah, well, we'll put it to a vote. We'll see what happens. A vote between you and I, that is.
Ivy wrote in saying, should schools offer cash bonuses for good test scores or good grades to children? This is pretty interesting. You know, there's a view that if you say, okay, maybe it's not the best thing to pay kids for good grades, but if you dangle a little bit of a financial incentive, particularly to kids who could use the money, you're going to motivate students to get better grades in school. Even if they're doing it for the short-term financial gain, it's going to better position them to get into college, for example. And the money you spend could really just, as a school district on this, could really just be seen as an investment in reality, because it's going to increase the number of people going to college, which is going to circle back and allow people to get better paying jobs in their community. And that really it's a way of stimulus, of providing stimulus. The counter view is that starting to get children to only take things seriously if there are dollar signs attached to it over the long term is actually going to predispose these students to not be the type of people that we should hope to develop as a society. So you can make pretty strong arguments for both sides, can't you?
I think so. It's unfortunate that in many cases, it seems like a bright future is not enough of an incentive for children to do well in school. But I think they should be incentivized somehow. I'd be very hesitant to have it be in the form of cash.
If you had a kid, right, and the kid was not doing that well in school, and you found out that you're working with your kid, really trying to get them up to speed on the material, and you find out the school is offering $25 for A's all of a sudden, and all of a sudden your kid starts taking it way more seriously and studying, and you don't need to help your kid, and the grades improve, would you still say, this is a bad idea, I don't want my kid getting the money?
Well, I guess I would have some anecdotal evidence that it can work, but how do I know what's happening in other people's homes with other children? It could be having a negative effect. There could be children who aren't doing well who now resent those that are, and I don't know. I just feel like it could complicate things and things could get ugly. But has this been done before? Do we have data?
There are some school districts that have offered bonuses for students who have perfect attendance, for example. There are some examples of the incentives for grades as well. I actually did not. I researched this for a while this morning. I didn't find any consensus as to the long-term impact on the individuals and financially as to the kind of multiplier or stimulative effect that this had over the long term. And maybe it's because this has kind of been done more recently and we don't really know what that is. I think before we really do the financial analysis, it needs to be a moral discussion for me, because whether or not it comes out being revenue neutral over the long term based on increasing college degrees and salaries and is thus the tax base for the community. First, we all have to be completely sure as to what are the morals and ethics of doing this. And to be honest, I don't 100% know where I come down on it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I don't think handing money to kids is the answer, but incentivizing them in different ways could help.
Send me your thoughts on this. What do you think? Paying for good grades or test scores. The part where it gets really concerning is with standardized test scores, because we already see so much corruption and so much, actually, as we talked about with Joel Westheimer earlier this week, standardized tests already are so problematic, and teachers are teaching to the test and being reviewed in some cases in terms of how their classes do, that I think incentivizing standardized test scores for students with money, that is opening things up to a whole new set of problems, and that I would be against, unless you have a really good argument as to why I should be in favor of it. Send me your thoughts. We will talk to you on the bonus show in mere minutes.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.